Welcome to Dialing In Your Coffee Business, where we help cafe and roastery owners build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including them. I'm Michael Ryan. I'm a certified business coach and consultant that helps cafe and roastery owners build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including them. On today's episode, we're continuing our exploration of the analogy of your business like an airplane. In the analogy of your coffee business like an airplane, the cockpit is leadership and management. The wings are the products and services you offer. The right engine is your marketing and messaging. The left engine is your sales. The body is the overhead, and the gas tanks are your cash flow and your cash flow management. On today's episode, we're diving into the wings of the airplane, which are your products and your services. For a coffee shop and a coffee roastery, your products and services must be in demand and they must be profitable. In the analogy of your business like an airplane, you can think of the purpose of the wings. They must be light and they must provide lift. Most coffee shop and coffee roastery owners do not price their products appropriately, and so they are selling them at a loss or at break-even prices. And that would be the equivalent of having wings on an airplane that do not provide lift, either because they're priced inappropriately or simply because nobody wants them. So today we're diving deep into how to price your products profitably, because the products are the wings of the airplane and they have to be priced profitably, just like wings have to provide lift. Please enjoy my conversation with Maxwell Mooney on how to price your products profitably. It's pretty clear that if the products are wings, there's some key things that have to be true of those things. So a set of wings on a plane, they have to be light and they have to provide lift, right? If you can imagine a pair of wings that are super heavy, that's game over for an airplane. But also a poorly designed wing, literally you could have a wing that's attached to a plane that's designed improperly, i.e. it does not actually provide lift, no matter how hard the engines are working, no matter how hard the pilot's pulling on that, console, whatever. It's possible to actually have a wing that doesn't do its job. And we see this a lot in cafes and roasteries, especially where they have products and services that don't provide lift. And they're way too heavy. So in our conversation, these are products that are not actually profitable. Like you sell them and you actually lose money when you sell them, and or they're just not in demand. Nobody actually wants them. This is a tough conversation because it almost always includes getting rid of something you probably love as the owner. Maxwell, have you ever had to axe a product that you loved, but it was either not profitable or nobody wanted it?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
When we first launched our food menu at Narrative, we launched with shakshuka on the menu, and this was in 2018, before it really took off in vogue. And I don't think folk in our area were quite ready for that as a concept. And so we had to take it off because we had limited space, and we had to focus in on products that were both more profitable and more in demand.
Yeah. And for those who aren't from Seattle or Portland or San Francisco, what is that thing you just said? That word
shakshuka.
You just said.
Exactly.
For those who maybe live in rural Midwest.
Shakshuka is a breakfast dish commonly associated with the Middle East, but it's primarily tomato and pepper base with eggs kind of dropped into it. It's usually in the form of a cast iron.
Yeah.
And it is very tasty. It's got peppers, onions. It's really nice. It's a great breakfast. I don't even like tomatoes that much, and I really like it a lot. So, fantastic breakfast item, but just not, if you don't know what it is and, you're at a coffee shop, you're like, I don't know if I want to trust any food item that I don't know how to pronounce from a coffee shop that just launched the food program. Even if I like the coffee shop, it's hard to get the traction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to put an even finer point on it, it was delicious. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Very tasty.
Yeah. And you still had to pull it.
Yeah.
I think, especially when I talk to roasters on Free Strategy Call, there's this underlying belief, almost hope, I would say, that if the coffee is good enough, nothing else will matter. It'll sort of eclipse everything else. And this, I think, is a great example of how it doesn't really work that way. This is why I like the idea of a business like an airplane. You get an airplane out on the runway with beautiful wings, but the wings don't actually provide lift, even when the airplane's going, supersonic. And this, I think, is a hard thing to reckon with for a lot of coffee roasters and cafe owners, where they really want there to be a version where you could have a delicious, breakfast item or an amazing coffee without having to consider whether or not people actually want it, and without having to consider if the product is profitable. One
thing really quick,
go ahead.
Not to derail the conversation too much, but one thing I think that can be helpful to remember is that sometimes it's not you can't ever do this. Sometimes it's not right now.
Yeah.
Which is something that I think a lot of times, especially in the specialty coffee space, it weighs on people because you want to be doing the really nice, crazy geishas with, 72-hour anaerobic from, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you just don't have a client base that's there. And that doesn't mean you can't ever do that. It's just that a lot of times these are trust making endeavors, right? And you have to build a level of trust with your guests and your clients to where they're willing to try something. Cause really what you're asking people to do when they've never had something before, and especially if it comes with a higher price point, is they're taking a gamble. That's what's happening is they're gambling with their money, and they're asking themselves, do I trust this entity enough to take a gamble with this money or not? I think a lot of times people want the trust without putting the work in to get there yet. Or they just want it right now, and they're not willing to take the step-by-step process to build that trust. Which, is maybe a sidebar, but something I think is possible, and I want to encourage people to consider.
No, that's such a good perspective. I feel like it's not a sidebar. I feel like it's a core part of this conversation, especially on the in-demand side of it. By in-demand, we mean people actually want this. People would actually buy this from us, and that's a part of where that trust plays in. I'd love to kind of split when we're thinking about the products as the wings of an airplane. I said they need to be light and they need to provide lift. They need to be profitable and they need to be in demand. Pricing products so that they're profitable, or kind of flipping that around, finding vendors to get the supplies at reasonable prices. This is a tough thing for a lot of people, especially if they don't have, somebody to compare notes to. You're spending, how much is an appropriate amount to spend on milk? How much is an appropriate amount to spend on a bag, a retail 12-ounce bag for your roasted coffee? What are some kind of universal guidelines when people are thinking about pricing so that there is profit in there? So we don't want them to have a structural deficit where they're selling the item or the unit at a loss. How do they walk through this? And maybe we can tailor a little bit to a coffee shop, cafe, and maybe if it's different for the roastery. But I have versions of this conversation a lot, and I'd love to hear how you would guide somebody through it. And maybe we're imagining somebody who's about to open, so that they don't have the added tension of changing prices yet. That's a separate topic. But my clean slate, how would somebody price their products so that they're profitable from your experience?
So in my experience of talking with people, there's sort of three main techniques that people use to determine prices in their business.
I love it.
The first one is just probably the simplest one, which is gut feel. They just go based on whatever feels right to them, and that's what they pick. Other people will do, and these aren't mutually exclusive, by the way. They can all exist at the same time. But oftentimes I've seen people do just that one, or they'll just do a market analysis where they'll go to other businesses in their field, and they'll just look at what other people are pricing and charging, and use that, somewhere in that middle. They'll take a low and a high and then try to be in the upper tier, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then the third one is a cost-based, or approach where they fully understand their costs that go into the item and then price it accordingly, and keeping some sort of gross profit margin in mind that they're looking for. So in my experience, using all three is the most effective way to come up with with pricing, but working in backwards order from what I just said is the correct way to do it, which is starting with your costs, then moving next to a market analysis, and then doing a gut feel as like the final little check. But that should never be the driver. Costs really need to be the driver. In my experience, because that's how you determine if something's profitable or not.
Yeah.
And sometimes, not to give it away, but sometimes the right call is to, if you can't make money with a product, to not offer it.
Yeah.
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 So anyway, that's what I've seen, Michael. What about you?
Yeah. Same. Absolutely. I usually think about market analysis and cost base, but you're absolutely right. The gut feeling is like underneath all of that. And as you were talking, I was just drawing three intersecting circles, but so the approach of all three things being at play, but the cost-based analysis being the top one.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I think that's so important is because if either of the other two, gut feeling or just market analysis, if either of the other two are your primary driver, when your costs go up, you're not going to change your prices.
Yep.
And that is a dead end path. There's a few paths you can walk down in a coffee business scenario, and you absolutely know where they lead.
Yeah.
And we often kind of waltz down those paths without kind of thinking like, oh, what's the natural conclusion of this approach? Mm-hmm. Market analysis, if your costs go up, but let's say your worthy rivals, theirs don't or something, so they don't change their prices, but your costs are going up, that only leads to one end.
Yeah.
The one I've seen used the most often, which is the least helpful, is the gut feeling one. Yeah. And I don't want to tally up the number of hours I've spent on calls having this exact conversation, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
And it essentially boils down to, I chose my prices based on gut feeling.
Yep.
And now I feel like I can't change my prices. Mm-hmm. One of the things we talk about, just to help people understand why this is so hard, is emotional anchoring.
Yeah.
If we used our gut in the first place, we will have chosen a price that we were emotionally attached to.
Yeah.
We are emotionally anchored to. But the world and the market is always shifting and changing a little bit. Mm-hmm. But our emotions don't really read the consumer price index and adjust. Yeah. They stay the same, which is why we get folks who come in and they're like, $5 for a cup of coffee. When I was a kid, it was 5 cents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Because they're still emotionally, that person is still emotionally anchored to that price point.
Yeah.
And so the gut feeling and the market analysis, especially if they're by themselves, but even when they're just the leading factor amidst the other ones, those are all dead end paths.
Yeah.
Because you'll inevitably get to a point eventually where you either have to close your doors or jack your prices. And that's it. Those are the only two options available at that juncture.
Yeah.
But if we walk back the cat, as they say, and do a cost-based analysis first, then updated, regularly, let's say quarterly, just for the sake of the conversation.
Great rhythm.
We can. I saw this YouTube video that he recommended this spreadsheet and then reevaluating your costs on a regular basis.
Never heard of that.
Yeah, I'll send you the link
sometime. Thank you.
I'll send you the link. Yeah, it was a good interview. But without that in place, we can't really tell if we need to raise our prices or not.
I think it's that gut feeling phenomena is actually also exacerbated by the kind of people who end up self-selecting into being business owners, right? Like a lot of times the people who become business owners are very frugal and they're very like wise with their money and they're very tend to be very like kind of value driven in terms of like, not spending money they don't have to.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times it makes them feel really uncomfortable to charge what prices they really need to in order for their business to be, profitable, because it just kind of grates against the fabric of who they are, and their memory is in the past.
Right.
So it's always like, well, this is what feels right. Well, it's like that's what felt right a year and a half ago before you just spent the last year and a half with your head down trying to build a coffee bar, and then all of a sudden you're popped up and like the world's a bit different than it was, 18 months ago. And so it's just, I think that exacerbates the problem for a lot of people.
Yeah. I think if I could make a blanket encouragement, recommendation, observation, if you've been at this for more than 1 year, your gut feeling is anchored in the past, and that past is now too distant to be a reliable anchor if you've been at it for 1 year. I know people who've been at it for 15 years and they're still anchored in the the early 2000s with what they consider to be pricing appropriate. I'm currently reading a book that was published in 1998, and they say some pricing things in there, and I'm like, what?
I know. There's
no way that thing cost that much at any time, but it was just 1998. It was not that long ago in the grand scheme. And now that book is almost ridiculous to read because the prices they mention are so small compared to what I know for a fact that entity is charging now for their products and services. I think one of the other things, so if we could just kind of acknowledge that whatever our gut feeling is, it's anchored into something in the past.
Yeah, it's old.
It's old. And you know me, I love old things.
Yeah, me too.
But not emotional anchors for pricing.
Totally, yeah.
The other thing I think is helpful, and I heard this a couple of months ago, people who are good business owners are generally high in trait conscientiousness. So in the big five, there's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Conscientiousness is essentially caring how our actions affect other people.
Yeah.
And good business owners are highly conscientious, which means they care how their actions affect other people. So far, so good. But it's possible to be so conscientious that you don't want to raise your prices on your customers.
Yeah.
Because you're worried how that action will affect other people in this context being your customers. So it's not that conscientiousness is good or bad, but you can go too far when it's completely unchecked, where you care so much that you won't even do what's necessary to stay open. And that is a brutal sort of catch-22 to position yourself in. Because again, you get to that point where you either have to raise your prices dramatically or you go out of business, and then think about how that action affects
everybody,
your customers, and your staff at that point, and yourself.
Yep, exactly.
So doing a cost-based analysis being number one, then a market analysis is great. Layer in some gut feelings as like icing on the cake, maybe, let's say. There's one other question I was curious to hear your thoughts on, and that is, if we can paint with broad brushstrokes, a general target gross margin for at least the cafe side of the business.
Yeah.
Because it'll probably be different for the roastery. But when I have this conversation with people, they've heard lots and lots of different numbers. The one thing that seems to be pretty true is that they all sound insanely high.
Yeah.
And people have like almost a conniption when I recommend a certain gross margin percentage. Remember, gross margin being not at all what goes into the owner's pocket. Let's be super clear about that.
Yeah.
Gross margins is just, the price minus
revenue,
the cost of the goods sold.
Yeah. So not counting in labor or rent or utilities or,
on,
your towel service, none of that stuff.
Yeah. Do you have a target recommendation that you share with people to get them kind of pointed in the right direction? Yeah,
usually like a 70% gross profit margin is what I'm looking for. So like having cost of goods sold be about 30% of the total revenue.
Yeah. And is that for cash flow or is that for pricing? Because sometimes with things that have a lot of waste or potential for waste, we might price differently than we expect for cash flow. Yeah,
I always do that for like in reality. So I usually function in some amount of waste, for milk, knowing that baristas, they're going to waste some milk. We're going to train them not to, but I still have to operate on the assumption of I've been a barista for a decade and have known baristas for decades, and they do that sometimes. So let's just account for that, you know, and price accordingly. So, you know, I always factor those things in, and I try to have as realistic of a picture as possible, you know, for that. But yeah.
For somebody who hasn't yet opened their doors, so they don't have any cash flow to analyze, do you recommend 70-30 for the initial pricing? Or because they don't know how much waste, they don't know how many bagels are going to get dropped on the floor. They don't know how many drinks are going to get mismade.
I usually recommend about a 10% buffer for like wastage. So that's not 10% additional. So not to go down to 20% gross profit margin, but to take, you know, like let's say your revenue is 100. And so your cost of goods is 30. That would be about a 3% total. Cause you'd be 10% of 30 is 3%.
I got
you know, so like that's, you know, plus or minus, and then you adjust from there, but that's a good starting place of like, you're not going to, you know, maybe 1 out of every 10 bagels falls, or,
right.
you know, for every 6 ounces of milk you steam, they waste an ounce, you know, somewhere in that territory, although that's obviously higher than that, but the milk still only makes up that, you know, small of a portion. So that's a safe starting place, and then you can adjust from there. And then obviously, like, one of the goals of being a good operator is to reduce waste as much as humanly possible.
Totally.
You know, plenty of those kinds of things, but it's a good place to start.
Yeah. Especially starting out. When I meet with people, I'll often encourage them to start with an 80% gross margin. As part of the exercise. It's not even so much that we would end there, because as we mentioned, like a cost base and then market and then gut. But I like to start with that primarily because it brings up that emotional anchor, and it kind of takes them right to the edge of what their gut feeling is, and their gut feeling is going to weigh in later. But I like that exercise because they might not necessarily be able to land on that price, let's say, especially a coffee roaster when they're first starting out. There's no economy of scale whatsoever. So if you tally up your cost of goods sold and multiply them by 5, that would give you an 80% gross margin. But I like that exercise because it kind of challenges some of those underlying feelings. And that becomes accessible potentially later on when there's some economies of scale. But that being said, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it also helps buffer against inflation, you know, which is sort of always happening, right? Like, even in a normal, like entirely healthy economy, you know, we're always looking for about 2.5 to 3% inflation. You know, it's like, that's going to catch up to you in a year. And usually most of the markets that I've been in, like, minimum is going up every year. So just pick that, and that'll at least buy you a little bit of time, you know, for when you have to change your prices again, like, you know.
I like that. It's a pretty difficult bullseye to literally nail. And sometimes I'll explain it this way and say, you're not going to do it perfect. You're either going to be underpriced or overpriced. Which side of this do you want to err on? And my recommendation is actually to err on the side of slightly overpriced. Obviously you can go insane either direction, but partially because in pretty short order, inflation is going to catch up with you, even if you're a little bit overpriced, or minimum wage is going to go up, or whatever. But also, it's really hard to come back if you've accidentally positioned yourself as the bargain option when you're starting out. So if you're a coffee roaster and you're entering the market with $12 12-ounce bags, good luck coming back from that, because as soon, people are, again, emotionally anchored. They're going to be emotionally anchored to your coffee at $12.
And you're attracting a different kind of client or customer at that point. You know, oftentimes you're finding people who are looking for a bargain. So the second that you're not the bargain anymore, they're gone. You know.
So that kind of takes us to the in-demand part of the conversation. Because what you just described is like people who are looking for a certain thing, and so they're attracted to your product for a second because it's the bargain option, but then they go find a different bargain later on. How do you kind of conceptualize in your mind assessing market demand? Like how do you check the mental box, so to speak, in your mind of like, yes, people want this. How do you assess that?
So there's 100 different ways you can go in this direction, right? One of them is sort of the like general intention of the person starting the business. You know, it's like, for me, with the kind of coffee that I like, I'm never going to be going for the bargain option, right? Like I'm just not going to be that. That doesn't mean somebody else shouldn't be. Other people should be. That's just not what I want to do. So what I'm looking for is markets and locations that will serve that particular where I think I have the highest chance of success at doing the style of coffee that I want to do, as in the need is there, like people want this. And what I'm looking for oftentimes are like demographic research. Oftentimes I'll use like Esri to pull up like psychographic data, which is this really powerful like data acquisition website and company that like every large scale company and government and NGO uses to access data about people. Generally, it's GIS based, so it's actually map based, but they have really powerful business analyst software that you can use to pull, and it'll tell you the kind of people that live in that area. So when I say the kind of people, I mean like culturally, like what are the things that they want? What are the kinds of values that they have as consumers? Like what are, are they pinching pennies and, trying to save up for, to start their own business someday? Or are they the kind of folks that, are, making a lot of money in their tech jobs, and so they have expendable income and they, want to enjoy it with their friends? Like, it kind of tells you those kinds of things. And you can use that data to figure out, like, is that kind of person the same kind of person that would like what I have? For specialty coffee, like the presence of craft breweries and other like craft-based, like quality-based business, food and beverage businesses in particular is always a good sign. If you've got a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods or something like that nearby, it's like, if you got a Whole Foods, then you probably know that they are more food conscious, but a little higher earning. If they've got a Trader Joe's, you know that they're food conscious, but a little lower earning, and you can use all that stuff to kind of just get a general sense for the kind of people that are there, which can be a really helpful way in terms of assessing demand. You can also look at what other businesses in your direct space are already there. And, it's like if they're busting at the seams, the demand's pretty high, versus if they're kind of slow, maybe then, it's like, it also should bring up a question of like, how good of an operator is that that business? Because there are people who are really good operators who are slow, and there are people who are not great operators who are really busy. And, and if that's the case, then it's like, oh, cool. Like there's some space here for me. So like those are all things that factor into kind of assessing demand for any given product. And it should be very context specific. It's like if you're going into an area and, there's like a real lack of a quality local roaster at every roast level, right? Like, that, if you come in and you offer a wide variety of roast levels that serve, the local community well, then perfect, But if there's, a lot, then, like you need to find some particular niche that's not being filled, or, find some need that's undermet. Yeah.
I love that kind of foundational framework of focusing on a need that is being underserved or not yet met, versus a focus that's more of like fulfilling my lifelong dream of roasting coffee this way, or serving coffee this way. To me, that's a completely different paradigm. And it's not that the business, cafe or roastery or whatever, can't be fulfilling. It's not that it can't fulfill your lifelong dream, but if it fulfills a real need in the community, an unmet or underserved need in the community, and if you fulfill it well, at a price point that generates a reasonable profit, that's a great foundation, especially before you start. One thing I've also seen people do is, and this is maybe for a new product versus maybe this wouldn't work as well for a brand new cafe or a brand new roastery. But once you have a roastery, before you launch your instant coffee or your tea line, or this could work at a cafe as well, but I've seen people do pressure tests of their markets. A sign up instead of a buy now button, a join the wait list button is a classic example of a pressure test of a market to see if the demand is actually there. I talk to a lot of roasters who are cautious or curious about carrying instant coffee of any kind. and they're worried that the market's not there. And one of the ways they could assess that would be by doing some sort of pressure test. Like, hey, we're thinking about partnering with Swift Coffee to carry instant coffee. Join the wait list. Well, and then if nobody joins,
Easy.
you have your answer. Sending an apology email to 5 people who joined a wait list and say, hey, the demand just wasn't enough. We decided to not move forward with this. Versus if you got 7,000 people who sign up.
Yeah.
Then you already also have an email list of getting them ready and excited to buy that instant
And
coffee.
they already bought in, at some level, like they already psychologically committed to it.
100%. Once you're up and running, there's one exercise that I've seen be really powerful for folks. And you and I haven't talked about this, so I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts. A product profitability audit, tallying up either using gross profit, or my preference would be
net.
Yeah, net, kind of, but like more like cost of goods minus labor, but forget about the rest for a second. So enterprise margin, I've heard it called, but you can slice it a bunch of different ways. You can do gross, you can do net, you can do enterprise margin, but getting a sense of like, what's the cost, what's the true cost of production of this unit? So what's the enterprise margin? And then multiplied by number of units. I like this exercise because it moves us out of the realm of percentages, which is where we normally live initially, which is totally fine. But it moves us out of the realm of percentages and into the realm of dollars. And because it's a combination of margin, profit margin, and units sold, it gives us that beautiful combination of this is obviously profitable and in demand, because the total profit dollars, last quarter or last year from this particular product are XYZ dollars now. But I don't hear a lot of folks talking about that exercise. I'm curious if you've ever come across that recommendation, if you ever did anything like that, or if not, just how does that sit with you? This idea of like kind of combining profitable and in demand by doing sort of a profitability audit of something like that, like a bag of coffee or a particular drink at the cafe.
Yeah. So we do, we would do a menu audit, as what we would call it, but just like, what are our best selling products? What are our, which things are moving well, which things aren't, right? And things that aren't moving well are candidates to be cut. Things that are moving well are things that we want to put more effort behind. Because it's like the more of those we sell, the more money we make, right? And then we always want to double check, making sure that those are profitable. That's always a big thing. Every once in a while, you choose to do something for the love of the game more than a great example in an area where I made this decision despite it being a bad idea from a business standpoint, but I did it anyway because I just really liked them, is mochas. I just could not get myself to move to a cheaper chocolate, even though we hardly make money off of our mochas, and it's the most expensive thing on the menu. On the normal menu at Narrative, and some people complain about the price, but most people didn't, because they also thought they were delicious. And so, we still did sell a lot of them, but it's like, generally speaking, good menu design is, you want your most high volume product to be your most profitable product.
Sure.
Which is why, like, McDonald's, for example, doesn't offer like onion rings and curly fries and, all of those kinds of things, because their French fries are incredibly profitable. And so anytime they offer something else that might take the place of it, they're actually hurting their business. Yeah. Even though people would still buy them because the product would probably be okay, or whatever. At the end of the day, it would hurt their business. That's good. And so they just don't do it.
That's super smart. What strikes me about what you were just describing is that, using the mocha as the example, it was a very intentional decision, and it was more the exception than the rule.
Yeah.
What I see in general is the inverse of that, where it's totally unintentional, and almost the entire menu is
that
more like that, where it's like, we accidentally don't make money on anything except our t-shirts, and nobody wants those apparently.
Yeah.
So that level of intentionality, number one, stands out to me. And then also the fact that it was the exception, not the rule, is really, really powerful. I think when we know the total profit dollars coming from, various items in our offering set, one of the most powerful things I've seen is when people promote the top performers and generally consider cutting the bottom performers.
Yeah.
Now, we just talked about like intentionally keeping something, and you and I have even talked about intentionally keeping even a whole program because it's spearheaded by somebody that you want to keep around. So there are reasons to intentionally, have exceptions.
Yeah.
But when we look at, the number of times I've had people say they want to get rid of all their dark roasts, and then we do this, and it's like everybody's paycheck is paid by your dark roast. So just hold on for now.
Yeah.
Can we reassess this? Or in the cafe setting, it's often something like their version of a caramel macchiato. It's like, so this is keeping the lights on. This is paying the rent. So before you go and cut it from a purist standpoint, can we make sure that we're not just going to throw the whole thing into the fire for the sake of getting rid of your dark roast or your caramel macchiato, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
Capitalizing and working in alignment with human nature, pouring gasoline on the fire that's already going, or that image that you showed during one of our small group calls a couple of weeks ago, where it's like, what did you call it? The path of desire.
Yeah.
It's like the walkway goes this way, but then all the students on the campus just clearly carved a path going this way.
Yep.
When we fulfill a real need, when we have things that are profitable and in demand, we build pathways where people are already walking.
Yep.
And when it's promoting the top 20% and or getting rid or considering getting rid of the bottom 20% of performers, what we're doing is we're just building a pathway where people are already trying to walk.
Yeah.
And conversely, like, oh, well, nobody uses this walkway. We can get rid of it and take those paving stones and move them over here. The amount of mental, physical, financial resources that each product takes is often underestimated, I think. People don't tally how much it will cost you, even just mentally, to like carry five brand new products you didn't have before, or for McDonald's to go from French fries only to like French fries and onion rings and crinkle cut fries and they'd have to carry a lot more inventory, that's for sure.
And develop more supply chain and find all sorts of other things. So
to wrap up this topic, one of the images that I sometimes share with my clients when we're talking about whether or not to launch a brand new product is to think, going back to the business as an airplane idea, and imagine an airplane with two really solid wings. They're light, they provide lift, and then somebody wants to come along and just tack a bunch more sets of wings to the airplane ad nauseum, until you have like 12 wings, except only the original two provided lift and the other ones are just dead weight. When I was on Keys to the Shop with Cristoferio, he said something like, you know what will solve the problem? More syrups.
Right.
I just lost it.
Yep.
Because that mentality of like, ooh, we're not breaking even, let's just add more wings that also don't provide lift.
Yep.
Is such a great way to crash the whole thing so fast. And I just would encourage people to think about a Frankenstein plane with 12 sets of wings, none of which actually add lift. This is not a plane that's going to take off, and it's certainly not a plane that's going to be safe.
Also,
for the staff.
If any of our listeners are listening to this, if you would please consider making that diagram for us and title it "A Biblically Accurate Airplane," I would love that very much, because that reminds me of the memes about that, which are fantastic. So if any of you are listening and want to do that, please tag me in it, and I will absolutely reshare that, because that would mean a lot
somebody with more graphic design skills than I have.
Yeah.
An airplane with like 12 wings, none of which
spinning around it.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, before we leave off this topic, just remember if your products and your services, right? So we talked mostly about products today, but if you're gonna do catering, if you're gonna host events, the same principles apply. Products and services need to be light, and they need to provide lift. They need to be profitable, and they need to be in demand.
Yep.
And if you start with a cost analysis, then look at your market. Mm-hmm. Then sprinkle on some gut feeling, you'll be in a pretty good spot. And if you want somebody to bounce ideas off of, me or Maxwell would be happy to hop on a free strategy call with you.
Absolutely.
Especially when you're at the beginning. This is like, man, this is the time to iron out the kinks in your pricing. Because once you go live, it gets really hard to change, especially if you're high in trait conscientiousness. That the thought of switching it up on your customers, whether you're a roaster or a cafe, is terrifying.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word, and getting out in front of this and connecting with somebody, us, somebody else who could review your pricing with you before you go live with it. So you don't have a structural deficit that you then have to go back and overhaul 3 months, 6 months later.
Yep. And just get more comfortable with the idea that pricing is going to change. You have to be more comfortable with that because literally nobody ever has been able to not change their prices if they've been in business for, so long. So,
oh my gosh.
Aside from maybe a particular hot dog at a particularly well-known business where they're losing money on each of those, but they do it for the other reasons. Anyway,
we went. So I'll close with this story. We went to a diner in a little tiny town, not too far from where we live. Low key, I thought this place was closed actually, but they're not.
Okay.
They have restricted their hours down to only when people actually want to be there.
Okay.
So they looked at sales data and then set their hours accordingly. Oh, that's weird. Who does that? But then the other thing that they've done a really good job of is keeping up with their pricing. We went in there and it has a look like it was built in the 1950s. I don't know. It probably was. And the ice cream cone was $5.50 for a single scoop. And I was like, that's why they're still open.
Yep. That's right.
That's why, because they restricted their hours down to when people actually wanted to be there and have kept their pricing current. And that's why Gordon's is still open.
Wild. Well done, Gordon's. Gordon's, if you're listening, we are accepting sponsors. So if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, please reach out to us, Gordon.
Gordon's Ice Cream Drive-In, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, we love you. Thank you so much for your support.
Keeping me fueled with Coca-Cola and ice cream cones.
Yeah.
No, but on the flip side, there's a place that we love in a different town, and there's always 5 people there. It's always dead.
Yeah.
Not enough for 5 staff for sure. And their pricing is ridiculous. And I go in there and I'm like, it's only a matter of time, man.
Yep, I know.
You can't have 5 people at this price point in this town. And they're going to go under, and I'm grieved by it because I know that's where that path goes.
Yep.
The
only way they're not going to go under is if the person who owns that has really deep pockets and does it because they just want to have something else to do.
Yeah.
But
they're independently
other
wealthy.
than that, they have to be going under.
Yeah.
So we don't have the luxury, especially if you're not loaded, you don't have the luxury of making those kinds of mistakes. So please don't. So
unless you're independently wealthy and this has been your lifelong dream, which I think I know one or two coffee business owners like that, but otherwise, in general,
you know what they say, the easiest way to make a little bit of money in the coffee industry is to start with a lot of money. That's kind of true.
Boom. Yep.
But you can make money, but you just can't sustain structural deficits like that unless you're able to, put in a bunch of money, which 100%. Is not a very good business. So.
Yeah. So for those of you who are not independently wealthy, which is most coffee business owners, price according to your costs, then some market research, then some gut feeling, and get ready to change your prices. Mm-hmm. How often, Maxwell, do you think?
Every 3 months, every 6 months? Be ready to do it every quarter.
Yep.
Yep.
I love that. Be ready to do it every quarter. I love that. That's that's it in a nutshell. You don't have to. But be ready based on costs.
Yeah. Also, one thing that I think people don't realize is you can actually lower your costs again, too, if your costs go up. For example, for a little while there, avocados were insanely expensive, and we had avocado toast on our menu, and it was like our primary vegan option. And we had a lot of conversation about, like, do we nix it until we can get these back down, or do we just raise the price and then, reevaluate later? And so we decided to do the latter. People still bought it when they were expensive because everybody knew avocados were expensive, and so nobody was giving us that much grief about it. And then whenever the prices came down, we lowered it the next quarter.
That's awesome.
So it's like you don't have to just keep it up. It's like you can totally do that. Like, as long as you're being fair, because people then understand why your prices move is because your costs move. And so, I think people are generally pretty understanding that that's the way the thing works. So anyway, be ready.
That's a good word.
You can be ready to lower your prices as well. It's not just raising them, although usually it is. But
that underlying assumption of fixed pricing is a prison that a lot of people I find are in. The fixed pricing, I mean, like, I started with a latte at $3.95, and so it has to be $3.95 forever, regardless.
Yeah.
That's a brick wall we don't want you to be inside of. And so, be ready to change your prices every quarter.
Yep.
Even if that means going back down. I love that. Very cool. Well, thanks for diving into product profitability and product demand. Really, we want to help you as a cafe and a roastery owner, as a coffee business owner, build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people. And just like a safe plane has sturdy wings that genuinely add lift and are not, super, super heavy and dead weight, so too do your products and services need to be profitable and in demand. Profitable and in demand, that's what makes the plane safe. That's what makes the business healthy. If you want to take great care of people, you have to have wings. You have to have products that are profitable and in demand. You have to. Otherwise, you'll never be able to take great care of people, great care of yourself, your family.
Any of your staff or their families.
Yeah. Whatever big dream you have, it's going to hinge in part on having profitable products that are actually fulfilling a need, that people actually do want them. As always, thanks for being with us. We hope this has been helpful. We hope these episodes are a way of bringing zero cost to consumer information about how to build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people. Until next time, take care. Thank you for joining me today for my discussion with Maxwell Mooney. Please check out the links in the show note captions to follow Maxwell Mooney on Instagram at Maxwell Threadbare. You can also check out the interview he did with Upflip that has millions of views. They interviewed him while he still owned Narrative. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on YouTube. That's a great zero-cost way to support this podcast. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple and Spotify. And on both Spotify and Apple, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. Please check out our online courses, our group coaching, and our one-on-one coaching. That's the absolute best way to support this podcast. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover or guests you'd like us to invite, please leave those in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not already following us on social media, we are at Threadbare Coffee Consulting on Instagram, and that's really the only platform we're active on. That's where I regularly post bite-sized thoughts on what it will take you, the owner, to build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including you. The content we post on Instagram overlaps with the podcast, but it's generally distinct from anything we cover on this podcast. If you haven't already visited our website, we have a myriad of free tools and trainings for coffee shop and coffee roastery owners. Everything from calculating your cost of goods sold for both a cafe and a roastery, which is completely different, pricing, which again for a cafe and roastery is completely different, managing labor percentage in a way that takes great care of people, etc., etc. All of those tools and trainings are available at our website, threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. And last but not least, thank you for your interest in building a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including you.